Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Mel Riddile. I will be your presenter and host for today's webinar. Our topic for today, which is sponsored by the Learning First Alliance, is Literacy Lessons Learned. As a turnaround principal, I've been and continue to be a strong advocate for adolescent literacy. And by adolescent, we mean students in grades 4 through 12. I've been involved in a number of national organizations promoting literacy, working with school improvement in a number of turnaround schools, and working with principals in over 20 states implementing new college and career-ready standards. As you participate in this webinar, we invite you to expand the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag as indicated on the screen. You can also follow NASSP on Twitter, and our handle is @NASSP. We're also on Facebook at facebook.com/principals. During the webinar today, we invite your questions. Please submit them using the question box on your GoToWebinar panel. We will respond to as many questions as time permits at the end of the webinar. If we run out of time to answer all questions, we'll respond by email following the broadcast. We are recording this webinar. It will be available on our website in the near future at the URL indicated on your screen, and I'll wait for you if you need to get that. If you have a technical problem during the broadcast, please contact Rich Peregrino at NASSP, phone number 703-860-7259. For over 2 decades, I've worked both in and with schools to improve student achievement by enhancing instruction through school-wide literacy initiatives. Years of practice and trial and error learning in some of the nation's most diverse high schools and middle schools have taught me that literacy is, at the same time, the most important and the most difficult initiative to implement in a middle or high school today. Because of the challenges which accompany the implementation of school-wide literacy initiatives, schools have tried every way possible to avoid the arduous task, pinning their hopes on one magic potion after another and failed attempts to improve student performance. And now with the adoption of new Common Core standards and new higher standards in every state, more and more school leaders are coming to the accepting the fact that literacy must be at least one of their focal points. This is especially true for principals in schools with significant levels of low-income students. These new standards make literacy a shared responsibility across all content areas. In addition to English teachers, math, science, social studies, and elective teachers are now expected to integrate literacy throughout their lessons on top of more rigorous content. Keep in mind that if your students are not engaged with complex informational text and you do not have purposeful reading, writing, and discussion occurring regularly in every classroom, your school is already significantly behind in implementing those standards. Why literacy? Literacy skills today are more important than ever before. Technology has driven up complexity, which has driven up the requirements of most entry-level jobs. Today, a high school diploma is no longer a terminal degree. The reality is that an 18-year-old who does not have the skills for college or career is effectively sentenced to a lifetime of 1, marginal employment, and 2, second-class citizenship. No matter what the standards are, literacy remains the key to improve student achievement. By literacy, we mean purposeful reading, writing, and discussion, and it's always been the cornerstone of education. Ensuring that all students read and write proficiently impacts success across all coursework in all content areas, and that includes mathematics. Literacy is not an add-on, but the foundation upon which all learning goals for the school are achieved. Fact is, literacy improves learning. Literacy skills and the ability to comprehend and apply course content are inextricably linked. By integrating literacy into classroom instruction, content teachers are ensuring that students will not only have a deeper understanding of the course, but they will also be able to apply the concepts learned in a more meaningful way. The fact is, most schools are trying to do too many things. This is just one example of one school's 18 different initiatives that were going on simultaneously. Obviously, this school was not able to focus sufficiently on any one of these initiatives to really make any significant progress. What research has shown is that successful schools and school districts consistently have fewer initiatives and a laser-like focus on what is critical to the success for their students. I frequently challenge school leaders to explain to me how they intend to improve student achievement in their school without at least addressing literacy. Successful schools and school districts consistently keep the main thing, day after day, year after year. Research shows that people who learn from mistakes learn faster and more deeply. Principals indicate that 70% of what they learn through practice on the job. Today, we will share with you what we have learned through years of practice. The last 20 years have taught me that if we want schools to improve, we must raise the achievement of all students, not just struggling students. To raise achievement, we must improve student literacy skills, reading, writing, and discussion. But perhaps the key lesson that I've learned is that in order to improve literacy skills, we must improve teaching school-wide. Integrating literacy in all content areas is a long-term process, not a one-time event. In most cases, it will take 3 years to put all elements in place and 5 years to make those changes sustainable part of the school culture. Unless students are succeeding in college-level or dual enrollment courses with respect to student literacy, our work is never done. That doesn't mean we have to wait 3 to 5 years to see positive results. In fact, there are a number of short-term wins along the way. For example, initially focusing on academic vocabulary in your school can yield significant early gains while you build the capacity of teachers to integrate literacy into their lesson plans. And now I'm going to turn it over to Debbie Hunsaker. It's my pleasure to introduce Debbie. She's with the Montana Office of Public Instruction, and she'll talk about Montana's ongoing statewide efforts to enhance literacy through the Striving Reader Grant. Debbie?
Hello. I'm going to talk a little bit about what Montana has learned implementing the Striving Readers Comprehensive Literacy Grant in middle and high schools. Our unit at the office, which is called Instructional Innovations, has had a lot of experience with early childhood and elementary schools through the Reading Excellence Act, Reading First and Early Reading First, but secondary has been a new adventure, and we have learned a lot from the high schools and middle schools across our vast, wonderful state. Next, Mel. Next slide. Okay. Just like in Mel's article with lesson number 5, our focus has been on improving classroom instruction to ultimately improve student outcomes. We began the project with a whole bunch of evidence-based literacy strategies, including CRIS, content enhancement, AVID, literacy routines, and literacy by design. And it was too much. Just like Mel says in his article, in the past he used a multi-pronged approach to changing expectations that included weekly newsletters, professional development, regular presentations, and frequent conversations with teachers. The problem with this approach was that it took too long, it was hit and miss, and most important, they had not developed a common language for discussing expectations. Our professional development with Striving Readers for literacy strategies was also hit and miss. We were not seeing a lot of implementation in classrooms and therefore not a lot of movement with increasing student outcomes. Next. Through the help of Dr. Timothy and Cynthia Shanahan and Mel, we have been able to better support schools and teachers to integrate literacy throughout their lesson plans while still implementing rigorous course content. We are doing a much better job now in tying literacy and content together. The Shanahans helped us understand the concept of disciplinary literacy and how schools need a shared responsibility across all content areas and not just ELA teachers. Mel guided our team and schools through developing instructional frameworks, which have really grounded middle and high schools in exactly what a shared responsibility with disciplinary literacy looks like. Schools' frameworks support not only a team effort, but a school-wide effort, and really a statewide effort with striving readers and also Title I school support. Next.
Okay.
We've done good work with literacy strategies, but we didn't give the administrators and the school leadership teams a process to tie it all together. The instructional framework does that, and now we have schools adjusting them based on the content area they teach. So the teaching and learning of vocabulary and science, of course, looks different than English language arts, but it is still vocabulary and fits into the school-wide framework. So everyone is still speaking the same language, and administrators can observe if it is happening or not, and then provide support and accountability as needed. Next. Mel discusses that there are really 5 indicators to a framework. The first indicator is a beginning, which is the S in the SNAKE framework from Anaconda High School. The second indicator is a purposeful closure activity, which is the E in the SNAKE framework. The third indicator is student engagement, which is part of the N and the K, with the I do, we do, and you do from Dr. Anita Archer. The fourth indicator is checking for understanding, which is in the K and E of the SNAKE framework. And the fifth indicator is the purposeful reading, writing, and discussion, which is the N and A of the framework, or the disciplinary literacy. Next. In Mel's article, Lesson 1 is literacy is a long-term, school-wide change initiative. We definitely agree with that. On the slide, you see a continuous improvement cycle, which is a key piece to our Montana Literacy Plan, and which has greatly helped schools with the change initiative and building sustainability with literacy. A mistake we did make, though, was waiting until year 3 to explicitly implement the cycles. We were implementing pieces of the cycles, such as the self-assessment, meetings, action plans, analyzing walkthrough data, and the self-assessment, but we didn't explicitly guide school leadership teams through the process until year 3. Next. This is a linear version of the continuous improvement cycle. We did this for easier documentation for the schools. This process, the continuous improvement cycle, has made sure systems are in place for improving literacy, instead of assuming they would be since the district said so in their grant applications. An example of this is each school committed to one planning period per week that focuses on the goals of the grant, which is literacy, for all staff that teaches literacy. But until we supported schools in implementing the cycles, we were not getting consistent meeting times, especially at the middle schools and high schools. We also had a disconnect between the goals and the school leadership teams. Between the goals that the school leadership teams were trying to accomplish and what the staff knew about those goals. The team meetings and the school leadership team meeting are becoming much better aligned now. So example, if one of the goals the SLT is trying to accomplish is to improve vocabulary acquisition school-wide, the team meetings now focus on that too. Questions like, how is each team planning and teaching and assessing vocabulary for all students? How do team members communicate with the school leadership team? How does the school leadership team provide support to all staff, to departments, and even to individual teachers, and measure if vocabulary is improving school-wide? The feedback loop between the school leadership team and the teams has become much stronger with the continuous improvement cycle. So we are doing a much better job because we have a framework for instruction, the instructional framework, and a framework for improving instruction, the continuous improvement cycles. Next. Here is an example of a high school school-wide continuous improvement cycle documentation. Look under Assess Current Status, Student Data. You can see it says Use Fall Benchmark Report to set goals on data form. So schools look at their data, they set goals of where they want to be from fall to winter. The goals are shared with teams, and then the teams set individual goals. Then the SLT reviews the progress of meeting those goals at each meeting and sharing that progress with teams and to determining next steps for improvement at the school-wide level and also at the individual team level. Next. Under Implement the Plan, you see the SLT and team meetings. This is where the feedback loop happens, or is supposed to happen, and supports everyone with that common language and understanding of literacy expectations. This is where time for planning, teaching, and assessing the implementation of the instructional framework happens on a regular basis, or is supposed to. A big piece under Monitor the Plan is the walkthrough data that measures the implementation of the instructional framework. Next. Because like Mel says in his article, which is on the slide, even when components of the program are in place, expect slippage to occur. When faced with doubt, uncertainty, and stress, teachers will revert to old habits, to the way we've always done it. Look at your literacy initiative as a way to change habits, and everyone knows it's much harder to change old habits than it is to build new ones. Tying the instructional framework to walkthroughs is making a big difference in our project for principals and really supports lesson number 8, failure to implement, lesson number 9, growing leaders, and lesson number 10, involvement of the principal in Mel's article. Changing habits is mostly about follow-up and the will to carry out your literacy plan. And supporting schools in a walkthrough tool that measures the instructional framework is helping principals follow up and follow through with their school-wide literacy plans. This is the Blue framework from Great Falls High School, Bison Blue. With Mel's support, this high school aligned their framework and their walkthrough tool and are beginning to share the data with the school leadership team and teams. Next. So school leadership teams look at both student and teacher data to make decisions about support needed school-wide, by teams, and for individual teachers. You can see the continuous improvement cycle in the far left column under agenda items, and the resource, the data and instructional framework, in the middle column, and guiding questions in the far right column. This agenda that mirrors the continuous improvement cycle guides SLTs through analyzing both student and teacher data to make data-driven decisions about needed support across the school. Some middle and high schools are at this level, honestly, and some are moving towards this level. Next. So what is our data showing project-wide? Well, we know this year that at the middle school and high school level, more students are at benchmark than any previous year in the project. And we have less students identified as intensive than any other year in the project. So we are feeling really good about our support of middle schools and high schools and everything we're learning from them. Thank you.
Okay, Debbie, stay on. I want to ask you a couple questions. One about the challenge of tying the framework and the walkthroughs together. Can you talk a little bit about that and some of the challenges you faced doing that?
Well, the challenge is that we started out with a really consistent, the same walkthrough form across all schools, but it just didn't meet the individual school's needs. So then we let each school choose their own walkthrough form. They just had to use one. And I think a big challenge, especially in bigger districts, is districts have predetermined walkthrough forms they want their principals using, but often there's not a connect from the walkthrough form to what they actually want to see in the classroom. So it has been a lot of communication, a lot of conversations, a lot of walkthroughs and talking with principals about what are you expecting to see, and is your tool that you're using for walkthroughs measuring that?
Okay, you said something important, and that is you allowed the schools to choose walkthrough formats that fit their needs. And one of the things I wanted to point out, too, that in the instructional framework for Great Falls and for Anaconda are different. Their acronyms at least different, but they're similar. And how are they similar?
Well, they have those 5 indicators that you talk about. They have the beginning and the closure and the disciplinary literacy and engagement pieces in the middle. So when we do professional development with middle schools and high schools, we at the state level, I think, and the principals can tell you this if it's true, that we are being more consistent with a common language and helping schools tie things together, but yet schools are still able to determine what they're doing for those indicators or chunks of the framework.
So each school has a set of expectations and a structure, but they can modify that to meet their own needs and also choose a walkthrough to match that area. So if one school's putting a lot of emphasis on academic vocabulary and another school may be working on writing, their walkthroughs can reflect that.
Exactly. Like we have a couple of schools that are just focused on the beginning and the ending of the framework right now. So during the walkthroughs, that's really the only data principals are gathering and sharing because they want to get those two ends really strong. And once those are strong, they'll go more to a consistency of the middle parts.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Debbie.
You're welcome.
Okay. Implementing new standards. School success is no longer about a few all-star teachers. Today, school success is about what we do together, school-wide, to improve student achievement. Individual teacher performance have given way to team effort. Hence, as Debbie talked about with the frameworks, people working together, the power to improve instruction lies with consistency, not sameness, across the whole school, developing a consistent set of expectations with all teachers and students. And just as the culture of the classroom is the sum of the teacher's attitudes and expectations, so too the school culture is a result of the staff's collective thoughts, beliefs, expectations, and conversations that lead directly both to individual and group behaviors. Culture is what happens when the classroom door closes and no one is looking. Unfortunately, in most secondary schools, when no one is looking, there's very little reading and writing. Despite advances in the field of adolescent literacy over the past decade, only a handful or small number of middle and high schools across the country have successfully implemented or are attempting to implement a comprehensive school-wide literacy initiative. And just to refer back, what Debbie's talking about is what I would call a comprehensive school-wide initiative. Cross-content or school-wide literacy, reading, writing, speaking, and listening, is perhaps the most significant change to affect in middle and high schools. Why? Because reading and writing instruction has never been a part of the culture of secondary schools. It's almost like a transplanted organ. And we need to keep taking anti-rejection medicine. Implementing new standards in school-wide literacy will require a culture change in each classroom and in the school as a whole. Like an iceberg, school culture is made up of what we can see above the surface and what we cannot see but is below the surface. So we have the visible and invisible elements of school culture. I learned that in order to shift school culture, I had to do two things. I had to change teacher expectations, and I had to dramatically improve classroom practices. However, school leaders can't wait for a change in teacher expectations before beginning the important work of improving instruction and integrating literacy throughout the content areas. We must pave the road as we walk on it, and that means we improve instruction while we are working to raise expectations. Literacy instruction and high-quality instruction are inseparable. They're the same. Literacy is not a software application, a computer lab, an after-school program, or a summer program. While a comprehensive literacy initiative may contain all of these elements, literacy instruction begins and ends with high-quality class instruction in every classroom of the school. Changing teacher practice is a monumental task that will take considerable time and effort, but one that needs the attention of principals and school leaders. While this may be simple to understand, it's not easy to implement. Why? Because with the exception of our most skilled veteran master teachers, we are changing the way most teachers teach, fundamentally changing the way teachers teach. In other words, we are attempting to get all the teachers in our school teaching like our master teachers have always taught. we're raising expectations for everyone in our school. Just to review, in our school and in the schools in which I've worked helping principals implement school-wide literacy, we develop a common language, Debbie talked about that, around teaching and learning by adopting a school-wide instructional framework, and then we begin an instructional, what I call boot camp, which has 4+1 key indicators of success. And Debbie mentioned those just to review those. We maximize the use of instructional time with a consistent focusing activity at the beginning of each lesson. We ensure retention and mastery of the lesson with a closure activity that provides feedback to the teacher on student learning. We maximize student engagement. We use frequent checks for understanding and formative assessments to provide ongoing feedback to students. And most importantly, we ensure that each lesson includes purposeful reading, writing, and discussion. While this does not represent everything that master teachers do, for example, higher order thinking skills, without these fundamental aspects, high quality instruction will not happen. Students do not become better readers and writers by listening to teachers talk. Yet teacher talk continues to dominate in most secondary classrooms. In fact, in most classrooms, teacher talk exceeds 80% of the total instructional time. We need less teacher talk and more student practice and more student work. The reason is simple. The brain that does the work does the learning. When I walk out of a classroom with a principal, I turn to the principal and said, whose brain was doing the work? The teacher's brain or the student's brain? Because the brain that was doing the work is the brain that's going to be doing the learning. From a practical standpoint, middle and high school teachers simply lack the capacity to integrate purposeful reading, writing, and discussion into their lessons. Even when teachers are receptive to the idea of incorporating literacy into their instruction, they lack the training and resources to deliver the instruction. When we know that our teachers lack capacity, it seems unfair to continue to use checklists and walkthroughs to inspect teaching. Instead, we need to adopt a common language around instruction, set clear expectations, and build the capacity of our teachers to meet those expectations. We make a pledge to teachers because many teachers feel overwhelmed. We pledge to them that we're not going to hold them accountable for anything we don't teach them other than knowledge of their content area. We do expect them to know their content area. Everything else about integrating literacy into their lessons and improving instruction, we're responsible to teach them. The clear, consistent set of expectations for the integration of literacy into the classroom coupled with regular follow-up is another key to successful implementation. Professional development should be continuous. It should be ongoing and connected over a period of years, job embedded, and teacher-led. Keep in mind that smaller, more digestible chunks and shorter PD sessions are easier for teachers to understand and implement, and those sessions must be followed up with a follow-up plan. How are you going to follow up on that? And talk more about how he implements literacy in his school, I'd like to introduce Paul Firthmeyer, who's the principal of Anaconda High School in Montana. Paul, are you there?
I am now.
Okay, I'm going to go to your first slide.
So Anaconda High School has been part of the Striving Readers Reading Literacy program that Debbie was talking about not too long ago, and we are in our 4th year. And one thing that I noticed doing walkthroughs, especially last year and confirmed it again early this year, is teachers really did not understand what was going to be asked of them with instruction with regards to the Common Core standards. So our first step really was to do a critical analysis of the Common Core standards. And what we started doing with this analysis, we focused on the content standard verbs and the nouns. And what we were trying to locate with the verbs is we were trying to figure out, trying to understand to what level of instruction our kids would have to show that they can do in order to meet that standard. And then of course, we were looking at the nouns in those standards to tell us what are the the critical concepts. What are the essential questions we need to ask our students at the beginning of the year in the course and then throughout every unit of instruction? It was obvious throughout the critical analysis of the Common Core that we could not satisfy the demands of the Common Core if we did not focus on literacy. So here we are 3 years into the Striving Readers program and found another reason why we need to really focus on literacy. So then we had to decide how are we going to develop our coherent unit of instruction. So just as we're talking about the framework that schools found, and you saw Anaconda Snake framework, we were trying to figure out how do we develop a coherent unit of instruction. What we decided to do is we started to look for what type of literacy skills do our students need. Do they need to read, write, speak? How do they need to read, write, and speak? Can they just do a general conversation about content area, or do we need to focus really on disciplinary literacy with reading, writing, and speaking? So with that, we started adding to our daily instruction purpose statement. And not just one purpose statement, but 2 different purpose statements that cover the content, the nouns from the standards, and then the language purpose statements gives us our verbs. It tells us it tells the students how they're going to show us, the teachers, that they've mastered what the content is, and they do that by reading, writing, and speaking. So as you can see, our whole coherent unit of instruction kept coming back to reading, writing, and speaking literacy. While developing units of instruction, another thing that we found last year and early this year was the level of expectation our teachers had for our students. So we did an analysis of different units of instruction using Webb's depth of knowledge. And during this alignment of unit instruction and unit activities and assessments, here's what we found, and I've confirmed it with 2 other schools since we found this, that we found that our teachers were having our students complete just level 1 and level 2 activities, recall and skill concepts, and they in fact thought they were teaching a much higher level with their students. That was not the case. We needed to have every student begin using their facts and their recall and apply some reasoning to it, both strategic and extended. We even measured the depth of knowledge of the questions that we do now in a lecture. So as a teacher is lecturing now, they have some pre-designed questions that they're going to ask. And what we found with our alignment with our unit instruction is that we did not meet level 3 or 4. So now what we do is intentionally, while we develop our units of instruction, we make sure that all of our verbal questions, all of our activities, and our summative assessment all meet the 4 different levels of Webb's depth of knowledge. And that has increased our students' capability of what they can do tremendously. A very important part of this Mel was talking about is we do not want our teachers talking. Yes, there's a time and a place where teachers need to talk and students need to learn, and that's done in your level 1 and 2 depth of knowledge areas. But really, we've got to allow these kids to read and write and speak to each other in groups. We all know as we are learners ourselves that we probably tend to learn more the more interactive we are. So our goal is to have students speaking and writing about their content on a daily basis. And the way we decide is how much each depth of knowledge should be covered in a certain classroom, or how much collaborative time they should have in a certain classroom. That was left up to the departments. We just brought our baseline data to the departments and we said, all right, here's what the data is saying. You're at a level 1 80% of the time, and you're at 10% level 2 and 10% in 3 and 4. What does your department want it to look like? And since then, our departments have stated how much time kids should be reading and speaking in their classroom, and to what levels should those activities be. Lastly, the other thing our teachers are really starting to do now, and you heard Debbie talk about the Shanahans, is we've had a chance to really work with the Shanahans this year. And every one of our teachers now is asked not to be a teacher. And that might not make sense, but my math teachers are asked to be mathematicians, my science teachers, scientists, etc. Because what we need to do for our students is our students have to hear and see the modeling of mathematicians and scientists using the information, reading like a scientist, writing like a scientist, and speaking like a scientist. So our teachers, whatever their content is, really needs to present their information in a different way. And with all of this, we focused all of our literacy instruction, our change with literacy, on the main constant that you'll find in any school, and that is the teacher. Go ahead, Mel. So what do the students focus on? You know, they are focusing on understanding the facts of the unit. That comes with the depth of knowledge 1 and 2, because it is essential that kids need to know that. But we do not want kids leaving Anaconda High School until they can tell us and they can show us and they can write and speak and apply and critique the facts that they learned in that unit. If they don't do that, we've failed them, because we all know that life after high school will require them to do that. And we ask the students themselves to start putting themselves in a state of mind like a mathematician and scientist. And this year has been one of our most tremendous years of growth with this project. And one reason, and then I'll finish with this, is that we focus on the school-wide approach, but this also includes our students being part of this approach. That's it, Mel.
Well, you said something really important there. You put your focus on the students. You know, when we go into classrooms, we watch the students, not the teacher. And do you do the same thing?
We focus completely on the students, and actually our walkthrough form now is simply our framework.
So you have all these elements in place. It sounds like you as a principal, you're really involved. You're right in the middle of all this. You're a facilitator. You're a catalyst. How has that changed what you do as an administrator?
You know, I don't focus so much on testing anymore. Like I used to be so worried about the testing. I'm now focused on making the best instruction in my classrooms, which I feel will result in better testing. I find myself developing more data collection tools. For example, with our units of instruction, every unit, the teachers of our school, they will fill out a form that tells me and them at what level of depth of knowledge are they going into. They'll do that with 3 of their activities throughout the unit of instruction. They'll do it on their assessment, and then every month, like Debbie was talking about, groups should be meeting weekly. At least once a month, we bring that data to our table as a department and as also as a leadership team and say, is this what we were looking for, or now do we need to change this and ask our departments to do something a little bit different? So I'm more of a manager of information now, Mel, and telling teachers what they're going to do.
Okay, you know, one of the things that it strikes me, having a clear set of expectations that you talked about, do you find your teachers having more conversations about teaching and learning than ever before? I mean, we're finding that in other schools. What are you finding in your school?
Absolutely. They're talking about teaching and learning, and more importantly to me, they're talking about individual students. You know, if a kid's in a tier 3 in reading, they're having conversations, not just the English teachers, but everybody who has a freshman comes around the table and they start having conversations and say, how do we start helping with the reading skills they're learning in a program and apply them in my science classroom? How do I take those skills, apply them in my social studies class? So they're having a lot of conversations about learning and instruction, but more importantly, they're having the deep conversations about our at-risk kids.
So instead of talking about student behavior and complaining about students, they're actually trying to figure out how they can help their students improve.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Paul. Very helpful. Very helpful. Okay. Let's see, move on. Researchers agree that teacher expectations are critical to student success. In fact, a secondary student who has one teacher, just one, with high expectations is 3 times more likely to graduate from college than a student who does not have a teacher with high expectations. Teacher expectations are much too important to be left to chance. But how many of us have a strategy for intentionally shaping expectations school-wide? Teacher expectations define the culture of a school. Those expectations are the autopilot that drives the school. No matter how many professional development sessions we conduct or how many strategies we teach, unless we change teacher expectations and mindsets, and that includes us as principals and school leaders, the literacy initiative and the instructional improvement will fail. Because as soon as we turn around, everybody goes back to what they used to do, back on autopilot. In the past, I used a multi-pronged approach to changing expectations that included newsletters, professional development sessions, regular presentations to our staff, frequent conversations. The problem with that approach was it just took too long and it was hit and miss. More importantly, it was developed, most importantly, we had not developed a common language for discussing expectations. So referring back, we had a common language for talking about instruction. We need a common language for talking about expectations. When it comes to literacy, secondary teachers are almost all on autopilot. In attempting to implement a school-wide literacy initiative, every secondary school principal will confront these mindsets. One, first, the students should already know how to read. But with few exceptions, the students are literate, they're functionally literate, they're not academically proficient. We work really hard to teach kids how to read, and once they learn how to read, we forget that we also need to teach them to read to learn. And that's really what Paul was talking about when they look at students in the classroom. They also, with decreased emphasis on content, they say, I don't have the time. But the best place to teach literacy skills is in the content areas. In fact, when students read, write, and discuss course content, it actually improves their understanding and promotes higher level thinking and application. And importantly, long-term retention of what they learn. So reading enhances the learning of the content. Third, they think, I'm not a reading teacher, and I have to agree, they're not reading teachers. What we do want teachers to do is teach the language of their content area. Most teachers already do that. We just want them to do it more explicitly and include reading and writing as part of that instruction. Today we begin, when I work with schools, we begin by reading and conducting a book talk on Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, which helps us create a common language around teacher expectations. We use growth mindset language in faculty meetings, and teachers integrate growth mindset language into their instruction and assessments. Where possible, we even have online mindset training for students. And now I'm going to introduce John Alhaas. John's a principal of Governor Mifflin High School, a school of approximately 1,300 students located in the Reading, Pennsylvania area. Welcome, John.
Welcome, Mel. Good afternoon.
John, talk a little bit about how you used Mindset, how you implemented it, and how it changed teacher expectations and teacher talk in your school.
We use several approaches. When we started working with you, that was one of the big pushes that we saw. And we were a school that had academic tracking several years ago, and we really didn't have expectations for all students. So one of the things we really had to look at was the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset, and that really that every student can learn. And when you ask a teacher, do you believe all kids can learn, everybody will say yes. But whether or not they believe it, a lot of times is in their vocabulary and how they talk about kids and how they approach their class. So one of the things we did a book talk, besides using it in our professional development activities and talking about it, but we did a book talk with over 30 teachers involved to really change the expectations of how we feel the students should be doing, and all students. It's easy to expect things from your students that are always in AP classes, but you need to expect great things from every student and what they're capable of. And with the right training and with the right teaching and enough time, any student can learn, and you have to have that approach with that. One of the things, our next step is really using that with the students. We have one of our teachers created a nice bulletin board for the kids and trying to talk to them about their language. and we're looking at instituting something next year for our 9th graders as they come into the high school, and talk to them about mindset and integrate that into the curriculum.
Okay, then, so you initially introduced the mindset concept to your teachers in faculty meetings, and then didn't you offer, make an offer to the teachers that if they wanted to participate in a book talk, that you'd buy the book for them?
Absolutely, we did buy the book for them, for anybody that wanted that. We had over 30 teachers participate, and we also, when we have our new teachers, every one of them gets a book, and that becomes a topic of our discussion of our new teacher induction. So we already have a large group of our faculty that participated that are on board, and now it's something, as we bring new blood into the school, that's something that they're also part of those discussions. And we also really, when we interview, we gear questions towards to find out, do they have a fixed mindset or do they have a growth mindset? Because that will trickle down into the students in the classroom.
Yeah, one of the questions we used to ask is about their philosophy of grading. We'd ask them a question about how they grade students, and that really helped us determine a lot of, although the book wasn't written at that time, looking back on it, that really told us a lot about their mindset.
Absolutely.
John, how much of a difference is that conversation in that common language around expectations meant to your school, and how has it changed some of the conversations?
Oh, it's huge. It's changed the focus of how we discuss kids. It used to be that the only thing we would discuss is discipline and behavior issues instead of, and their effort. It was always writing the kids off as, well, they just don't care. They can't do that. And those phrases are rarely heard anymore. Now it's, we need to reach every student, and we expect every student to do well. We don't write kids off. We expect great things from all of our kids, and that just trickles down then into the culture of the school. If you have that attitude and that approach, it creates a school culture of wanting to learn, and that kids believe that they can do anything.
Great. Next question I want to ask is, talk about your instructional framework a little bit, describe that for people, and where you are in terms of implementing. What are the key elements there for you?
Our instructional framework, we had started with learning focused schools years ago, and a lot of it's just the best practices that you'll see in many packages. And one of the things our staff had trouble with was knowing, do they have to do all of these things every period? And so we narrowed it down with the BEAT framework with what are the main components, and it comes down to, as others have said, a beginning, which we use an essential question and a bell ringer, an ending where you have to have some type of assessment to determine what did the kids learn, engagement, and practice. And really that framework now has become an expectation. At first we had to work through and piecemeal it. Okay, now we're working on the beginnings, now we're working on the endings. Now it's a minimum expectation. There shouldn't be any reason why we don't see a bell ringer. Or there's a conversation, or an ending with a formative assessment. It's just the way we do things here, and it comes down to consistency for the kids, and you set those defined practices and expectations, and that's how you really build the culture of your school.
Okay, John, you said something really important, and that is, this is a minimum expectation.
Absolutely.
But it's a clear expectation. Do you think if I walked into a classroom in your school, your teachers could describe the framework and what the expectations are?
Absolutely. And one of our conversation was this year was just that this was a minimum. We shouldn't have to go through with you anymore piece by piece. We're looking for quality now. We're looking for quality engagement, quality essential questions, not just compliance. And so we've taken it to another level of what we do in the classroom. Okay.
Next thing, I want to ask you to talk about this 5-year discipline comparison. And I know initially when we talked about, eventually if we could improve instruction, we could really cut down on our discipline issues. And what did you think when I said that?
I was skeptical. I was hoping you were right, but I didn't realize the effect that I saw when I started running the numbers. I was blown away at what that has done by implementing the bell-to-bell instruction and the student engagement and increasing that, and our discipline numbers plummeted. And now as associate principals, they can get out in the classroom because, they're not constantly suspending kids. And, one of the things that we found also, we also changed our philosophy a little bit of discipline, but now without kids being suspended, they're not removed from class. So now they're in class and they're engaged. The number of referrals we get for in-class issues are minimal. It's usually out-of-class issues that we have to deal with. And we no longer can function with ISS, but if you look at the numbers, that really hasn't hurt us much. Our suspensions are minimal, and we're keeping kids in class.
So you said something really important, John, and that is on that the left column, 2010-11, you were an assistant principal then.
Absolutely.
In that school.
Yeah.
So
that was rough.
Yeah, and so have the kids really changed in your school, or have the adult behaviors really changed?
I think it's the adult behavior, and that's changed the culture. And overall, our school culture is phenomenal now. The expectations that teachers have for kids, the expectations kids had for themselves, and this is something, if you could go back to Madeline Hunter, it was always good planning is the best classroom management practice. It was good planning and engaging activities, and that has filtered through, and that's, I believe, is the biggest reason for this drop in discipline.
So comment on this, John. Look at your teacher detentions, your teacher referrals and detentions, down 80%. That's huge.
Yes, yes, and that means that they're not having nearly as many issues in class. And that's because they're engaging the students, and they're not giving them the downtime by going bell to bell. Students know they're going to be held accountable for the work.
So when kids enter class in your school, they're expected to sit down and begin work on a bell ringer right away. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
So that sets a tone for the whole class, for the expectation in terms of behavior.
Yes, and that's not supposed to happen. The bell isn't a starting point. That's, it is a late bell. They're expected to start their work as they walk through the door and be prepared. So that alone should cut down on some of the activity that normally would lead to some detentions and things like that. But it's also, if you can't start the class off on a good foot, it's going to be tough the rest of the way.
Right. And your Saturday detentions are down 64%.
Yes.
You eliminated ISS this year, but as of last year, they were down 67%.
Right. And a lot of the ISS, what we found...
That's in-school suspension, so everybody knows.
What we found was, why were they getting ISS? Well, because they were cutting class. And then they would cut the Saturday detention, and then they get ISS. So why are we removing a kid from class because they already cut the class? So, you're not really helping yourself out because now they're missing double the classwork.
So if I'm an assistant principal in your school, I can actually get into classes and observe them, and I'm not on a treadmill doing discipline all the time.
Correct.
Excellent. Finally, your out-of-school suspension cut in half.
Yes.
Now, you didn't have a huge suspension rate. You had a lot of referrals. If you look back to that first year, you had lots of referrals, lots of after-school detentions, which was probably keeping you busy a lot as an assistant principal. But you've cut down every measure of discipline has cut down, and even to the point where you've eliminated in-school suspension. That's huge.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And really, even this year, it may look like they're up, but we actually... some of those suspensions, we had a couple big incidents, so it wasn't. They're almost outliers in the numbers. So we're staying pretty consistent with the numbers this year.
Okay, so you really feel good about instruction, and you feel good about behavior in your school.
Yes.
Excellent, John.
It's really turned the culture around.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you for having me.
Literacy is all about meeting student needs, not fulfilling adult wants. Knowing where students are is the key to knowing what you have to do to get them where you want them to go. Begin by doing a literacy checkup, a school-wide diagnostic. Gather the data. If your school is like most, the assessment data will tell you that for many students in your school, you have to make 2 years of progress for every year they're there. Our average student entered school as a 5th grade reader. We knew that we had to make 2 years of progress every year with those students, and we did for 10 consecutive years. Okay, moving on. Literacy instruction begins and ends, as we've been talking about, with high-quality instruction in every classroom. School-wide literacy is about improving the reading, writing, and discussion skills of every student, not just struggling students. Intervention for struggling learners are an important part of a literacy initiative, but the key to success is what happens every day in every classroom in your school. While interventions, or as I call them, lifeboat programs, are a must for struggling students, a school's success cannot rest solely on attempts to save struggling learners. We must seek to continually reduce the need for intensive interventions by continually improving the quality of instruction in core classrooms. That's the foundation of your school's success. We must provide additional resources to supplement classroom literacy instruction while building the capacity of teachers to integrate literacy into their normal instruction. For example, we employed a focused computer-based application for all 9th and 10th graders in English, social studies, and science. But we also provided additional instructional time after school, on Saturdays, and during the summer months. Finally, we offered a more intensive intervention for students who needed to make even greater gains. And now I'm going to turn over to Heather Hoyer. Heather is currently assistant principal at Great Falls High School in Great Falls, Montana. Heather will be assuming the principalship next year upon the retirement this year of Principal Jane Gregoire, who I've had the pleasure of working with Jane for several years now, and they're doing outstanding work there. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you, Mel, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited that we get to share what we are learning, and in many cases relearning, about high school literacy at Great Falls High School. A little bit of a background about Great Falls High. We are home to approximately 1,300 to 1,400 students, and I say 1,300 to 1,400 because we have a pretty high transient population that moves in and out of Great Falls every year. Currently, I have about 361 true freshmen at Great Falls High, and we are a campus setting. You know, early in our relationship with Mel, he provided us with a list of 40 things that schools do for 9th graders that increase their rate of success. And one of them was to keep the freshmen separated from older students. This helps ease their transition and really helps us address the unique needs that they innately bring to us as freshmen. Because we're a campus setting, we have different buildings. I am able to keep my freshmen with me over in what we call South Campus. And so that's helped us ease that transition. Mel, if you could go to the next slide, that would be great. Now, several years ago, we did away with teams. We had been part of a Small Learning Communities grant quite a while ago, actually, when I joined the staff at Great Falls High as a teacher. And then we moved away from that a couple years ago. The teachers really realized the error in that, and we had a grassroots movement to bring our freshman teams back. I currently have 3 teams here in South Campus. The teams consist of our math teacher, our history teacher, a science teacher, an ELA teacher, and then we have a stat teacher who is really a transition teacher. The core teachers take a look at students, work closely with parents, and we're able to offer tiered classes in both math and English. We use ISIP for all of the classes when we're looking at placement. ISIP is an assessment that we use for reading, vocabulary, comprehension building, and also the SMI test scores in math, as well as our state and district data. Our teams meet 4 days a week. One of those days they have duty, but 4 days we dedicate just to having data-driven meetings on students' achievements. And we often bring in our parents or family members to have discussions on student achievement. We have literacy specialists who come in and help our core teachers focus on what's going well in classrooms and what are some initiatives we need to put into place to help students achieve more, some tools or some resources that we can bring in to help achievement. And we also work with our Indian Ed coaches and specialists to help us with that component as well. The transition support that we've built in both with STAT, Indian Ed for All, and literacy has been something new this year, and it's been really, really important that each team has a specialist that can spend time just helping the teams look at that data. and build programs that are best for kids. What we have found out is we've really been able to close achievement gaps with our freshmen, but in the course of that, we have moved that transitional year up. We're seeing more students struggle in their sophomore and junior year. So we wanted to put into place this year something that allows us to move those achievement plans from the freshman year up into the older grades. And we now rely on our school-wide RTI team for that. The teams take care of it in their freshman year. Then the RTI team takes over those achievement plans and carries them through for sophomores, juniors, and seniors. And hopefully at the end of this year we'll be able to take a look at some data and see if that plan for progress is being met and our goals are there. Next slide, please. Now Debbie mentioned earlier, as did Mel, that we put in a framework for teaching. We really wanted to be sure that we could enhance our teaching practices building-wide. And as an administrative team, we've really focused on keeping things simple and sustainable. And so we put in our blue framework, which Debbie had on one of her slides earlier, and so I posted it back up here for everybody to see, where it allows the teachers to do just a quick visual check. Did they do all of the components of a lesson that allows them to move their students towards mastery? Our blue bookshelf, so to speak, our expectations really are built on the relationships that our teachers have with their students. And we went ahead as we started to roll this out to the teachers and we chunked it. And we held true to that promise that Mel shared earlier, the pledge that Mel shared earlier, by telling our staff that we wouldn't hold them accountable for things that we haven't provided them support or professional development on. So when we did initially showed our staff blue, we didn't want to overwhelm them. So we focused just on the bell ringers and the exit strategies. That was our first year. We figured that was the biggest bang for our buck, and we were able to see dramatic improvements both in students getting to class on time and in the qualities of lessons that we were seeing within the classrooms. Now that we're a year plus past that, we are working on really the learning objectives and literacy strategies and the checking for understanding. But we have noticed some slippage, and so we are going back and consistently reinforcing bell ringers and exit strategies. In fact, as we speak, our staff is in a PLC time right now, and they are watching videos on formative assessment, on checking for understanding, and on some different vocabulary strategies and doing some teamwork on building those tools for them to use with their students. We've worked pretty extensively as well as aligning our walkthrough tool that we use as administrators to take a look at the best practices, and we worked very extensively with Mel to get this to dovetail with the district-wide movement for the Danielson and the EPASS evaluation system. We wanted our teachers to have a very consistent flow of expectations and pedagogy, so Mel's worked with us to align everything, and now no matter what we do, whether it's a walkthrough or a formal evaluation or even just our communication in our discussions that we have during PLC time, there's that consistent communication and vocabulary amongst us as professionals. One of the really cool things that just happened was that kind of goes along with this is we had a math teacher who I would consider one of my purest math teachers, as high school teachers can often be. She teaches both here at the high school and at both of our local colleges. And she was having a very intense and rich and, well, intense again, conversation with our district curriculum director about a textbook that she felt they needed to adopt. They're in the process of adopting new textbooks. And her reasoning was both the math content was strong, but the literacy content was stronger. Because within that math textbook and that publisher, there were 2-column notes built in, there were brace charts built in, there were even some unit organizers. And so listening to her have that conversation made me realize that our staff really is turning the corner professionally, and they're taking literacy to a whole new level across the board in the content areas. So now at Great Falls High, we're working hard on our next steps. We're looking at putting some things into place maybe producing some small videos of ourselves for professional development purposes within the building, and continuing to carry our literacy initiatives forward.
Thank you, Heather. Now, you've also seen dramatic changes in behavior across the board. I believe attendance,
Yes.
Can you comment on that a little bit? 'Cause John saw that also, and you've seen, I know, amazing gains and improvement there.
We have. We worked both with our teaching strategies through Blue and also with some attendance initiatives. And we have seen, it used to be where the bell would ring and it was kind of like the bell was a suggestion to get to class. And you had the administrators in the hallway shooing kids into classes and the teachers kind of taking their time. And over the last couple of years with the work we've done, the hallways are clear before the bell even rings. And so I think, John, the comment that he made about if, you're waiting until the bell starts, you're kind of too late, that's not the start of class. That's where we are as well. And so we've noticed a huge decrease in tardies. We've also noticed a decrease in our kids even just skipping out. They're finding classes more engaging. The teachers are really focusing on group work and partner work and the literacy strategies, the deep thinking that the kids need so they can see the relevancy in what they're learning.
One question from the attendees here today is reference to literacy. How are you integrating literacy into your vocational or career tech ed kind of classes? They said, should we just focus on literacy in core classes, or can we actually do that in some of your other elective classes?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it was our IT, our shop guys, who took hold of Blue and ran with it before any of our other departments did. We have had amazing support in our IT and our shop classes, our FCS classes, and just a lot of our elective courses that we have, in part because our students who really struggle a lot of times with the literacy component in the traditional classrooms, the reason that they're here, the hooks for them at school are their shop classes, their music classes, their art classes, their cooking classes. And we've noticed that by the teachers using the same focus, really teaching that content vocabulary, talking to the kids about what it means to be able to talk like a carpenter does as far as the measurement needed in math and the vocabulary needed for construction is very rich as far as the literacy instruction goes. We have our shop teachers are using 2-column notes. They're using unit organizers. Our PE classes actually and health classes were the ones who pushed unit organizers across not just Great Falls High but across the district. They provided professional development across the district for that. And so we're finding a lot of success on our outlying classes, and it's actually kind of trickled inward to a lot of our other classes where the most recent group to really, really get excited about embracing literacy strategies is our English department, which you'd think that would be first, but it just worked in reverse for us.
Heather, thank you so much for joining us today. You're really shared some great stuff with us. Thank you.
Anytime.
Okay. When researchers look back over the last 50 years of school improvement, they spotted the main problem: poor implementation. You've heard each one of our guests today, our panelists, really talk about the implementation challenges they faced and how they have to go back sometimes and redo some things, revisit things, and how they're consistently monitoring. We have many excellent strategies and programs, but if we don't implement them with fidelity, they don't work. And we already have all the knowledge we need to help our students succeed, but we have to implement that. We have to have a laser-like focus on no more than 2 or 3 initiatives. And one of the reasons behind poor implementation is that we're attempting to do far too many things. Second, we need to implement those initiatives with fidelity. In our case, less is more. Our school won a number of awards, not because we had better ideas than anyone else. We actually had fewer initiatives, but we implemented the things we did better than anyone else. We also spent more time talking about why. We chose a particular area of focus. My best advice is to school leaders today is have fewer whats and spend more time on the how and why. Schools are changing, students are changing. Successful implementation of a school-wide literacy initiative is complex and requires a different style of leadership. The reality is no longer can any one person do it alone. First, find a literacy instructional coach who can provide not only knowledge and expertise, but help build teacher capacity to effectively integrate literacy strategy. Debbie in Montana is doing that with schools. Secondly, identify teacher leaders throughout the school and invite them to participate in a leadership or literacy council. Under your co-leadership, that you and the instructional coaches, this group analyzes student data, we talked about that, participates in planning, program design, and evaluation of multi-level literacy program. This group, your teacher group, of early adopters, also helps pilot recommendations before they introduce them to the entire staff through professional development activities. High-performing schools develop teacher leadership throughout the school. In those schools, leaders grow leaders. If literacy is important enough to be one of your areas of focus, then it's got to be important enough for you to be involved as a principal. You don't need to be an expert on literacy, but you need to know enough to lead a literacy initiative. When it comes to new standards and school-wide literacy, we're all learners. Remember, the lead learner is the learning leader. We've talked about habits and slippage. So even when the components of the program are in place, expect that slippage to occur. Don't be surprised when it happens. When faced with doubt, uncertainty, and stress, teachers will simply revert to old habits. That's the way we've always done it. Look at literacy as changing habits. Look at improving instruction as changing habits. And it's much harder to change old habits than it is to build new habits. Integrating literacy, reducing teacher talk, increasing student practice, engaging all students, and teaching to mastery, not covering content, are all huge changes in habits. And habits take time and lots of follow-up. Yes, changing habits is mostly about follow-up and the will to carry out your literacy plan. And as Jim Collins said, great schools are not a matter of circumstance. Great schools are a matter of will. Now I'm looking at here with time for questions. We're pretty late running through this. We had great guests, and I really appreciate, again, those guests. I believe we've answered all the questions. And so at this point, we're going to bring this webinar to a close. And what I'd like you to invite you to join your colleagues in Orlando on February 25th through 27th in 2016 for NASSP's annual conference, Ignite 16. And you can learn about the conference and register at the address shown on the slide at www.nasspconference.org. This webinar will be accessible, is being recorded, as I said in the beginning, and will be accessible at nassp.org webinars video. That's one word, webinars video. Thank you for joining us today, and come back to a future webinar at NASSP. Thanks again for joining us.